All right, folks, welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a while. We'll talk about that in another video. In this video, I want to talk about something right now that's been trending with some believers, and of all people, it's the dispensationalist Christians who are still looking for a rapture. And one of those is somebody that, I appreciate very dearly, and that is Louis Vega, who I didn't realize had a YouTube channel, but apparently he does. I happened to find a video of his that is very interesting to me, but not only him, but I'd seen several others that are talking about this one concept, which is the Feast of New Wine. And incidentally, many of them were looking for a rapture around this period called New Wine. I want to address that today in this video, and we're going to use clips from each one of those, and we're going to do something called biangulation. You guys ever heard that word? That's the word of the day. Biangulation. You've heard of triangulation, right? When we're trying to find a fixed position and triangulate something, usually in navigation. This is something I learned in the Marine Corps in navigation, which was trying to find a fixed position using fixed points of reference, and you would triangulate, right? Well, what we're going to do in this, even though we can triangulate because we're talking about wheat, wine, and oil, we're going to do what's called biangulation. And let me just show you that word if you've never seen it before. The establishment of two-dimensional position of a point relative to a fixed point by first establishing the position of an intermediate point. So, let's say you got a fixed position. You could either come at this at a right angle, a 90-degree angle to come to a fixed position, or it could be 180 degrees. It could be, 25 degrees. It could be all that range, right? Anything in that range there. And that is called biangulation. A good example of this would be Hezekiah's tunnel. One of the great marvels of ancient engineering when they dug the tunnel, which was the Gihon spring, from two different directions, and they came to a fixed point. That's kind of what we're going to do with this day called Pentecost or Shavuot. Is it the same day? Is it different days? Are wheat, wine, and oil celebrated at three different days that are separated by 50 days? I've found people that are looking at that and thinking along those lines. I disagree. I've said many times that if you start at the wrong point, you're going to end at the wrong point. The closest one to this, and wow, it looks like I get a little something behind me when I move too much. The closest one to this has been Lewis, and so I got to give him props to that. But I'm also going to give him some maybe some adjustments. I would love to collaborate with you, Lewis, by the way, on this particular timeline, because I think it's very important. I have studied the agricultural part of what we're about to talk about, right? So you've heard me talk a lot about wheat.
For about 7 years. It's been about 7 years that I've studied the actual agriculture of this whole timeline.
And starting from the time of Abib, the establishment of the growth cycle of those two grains, barley and wheat, from Exodus 9, and building from there to a point. What you're about to see is other folks, and like I said, it's mostly dispensational people that are coming from the other direction with the new wine. Now, I have also used new wine as a witness, but it's been a secondary witness to my primary, which has been the wheat. So this fascinates me, and it also encourages me, because I thought I was I felt like a lone maverick out there trying to bring this revelation about, how Yah has, first of all, he's preserved what was hidden in his agriculture and in his feast layout as it corresponds to the Sabbath and the sun, moon, and stars, not just the solar, also the moon. Psalm 104:19 is very clear the moon plays a role. And there's a couple of these examples who are only using the sun, and they're still coming up wrong on it. And so I'm gonna add my 2 cents into their conclusions, because some of them are they're almost there. They were almost there. It reminds me of me when I was trying to reconcile this, because I looked at this from every angle possible, from every calendar possible, and what I've been teaching you actually for the past several years has been my conclusion, which is this must be on an agricultural lunar solar calendar. It has to be. Exodus 19 is, Exodus 16 is very clear that that is the count, right? And so we're going to.
And what I mean by that, you guys, when it tells you that they left Egypt on the 15th day, which on this calendar is going to be a Sabbath. That's why they left at night when the Sabbath was over. They arrive at Elim 1 month later on the 15th, and they rested, and then they worked the next day for 6 days, gathering twice as much and resting on the seventh day. When you do the math, it's simple math, you guys. It lays out a pattern, okay? And we are including new moon days.
Talk about that, and I'm going to use Lewis's chart, and I love this chart. I've been talking about putting together a timeline that is more visual, that you could see and understand what we're talking about when it comes to these counts, because there's markers in the scriptures, and then there's markers in the actual agriculture that we can line up. New wine is one of those. And so we're coming from the other direction in this presentation, right? Biangular. So I want to first start with did I show you this? All right, so the Qumran scrolls. This has been kind of trending here recently, especially with those people I was just telling you about. In the Qumran scrolls, there's something where they're identifying the 3 Shavuot festivals of Qumran, wheat, wine, and oil. Now, in some interpretation of this information, people are trying to see it as 3 separate feasts. And that is not the case, because these are synonyms. So I want to address that really from the get-go. This is more along lines of this, and I'm going to give you an example. The day called trumpets, which is also called the day of shouting, which is also called the day of
Hang tight, you guys.
looked like I dropped out there for a second.
Internet was dropping out
on this video. Anyway, yeah, please rebuke those those things that we're trying to hear. So, these words are synonymous. The day of trumpets has many names. The day of the bridegroom, the day of shouting, the day of the wedding, right?
the day of the king, coronation day.
I could think of 12 different names that are synonymous to that one name. So if I just use any one of them in that culture, they would immediately know, the people of that culture would know that I was talking about this one day. It's very similar to what you see there and what is being interpreted as 3 different feasts in the Qumran scrolls. It's talking about one feast, and that is the latter harvest. There's a former harvest,
which is, guys, the former harvest. The former harvest is or the first fruits of the former harvest is the barley. All right, that's a wave sheaf. 50 days later, that's harvested. And then there's another first fruits that's going to celebrate everything that's going to be harvested in the summertime, concluding with Sukkot. All right, that's the summer fruits. All right, Amos, what do you see? I see a summer basket, right? Yah says, I'm going to turn your feast into mourning. I've done a video about this, how Yah in the last one in 70 AD, he turned every single feast into a mourning right? And then after that, everything was lost. This is why 900 years later, you got rabbis trying to figure out what Pentecost is or what Shavuot is. All right.
A former rain, a latter rain. All right. So spring and summer are the two seasons that we're talking about. Barley fits on that margin there, and then summer and late summer is the rest of the agriculture that we're talking about, right? But everything begins there at Abib time, right? So we got to understand how to separate those, especially when it comes to the count, and then we can understand what's going on there. We're not talking about three different feasts there, and it doesn't end at where the conclusion I see with several of them is they not understanding how this goes out. There's a first fruits, first of all, called the wave sheaf, right? That's marking a point. And then you have what most people interpret as 50 days later is something called Shavuot or Pentecost. And the Rabbinic Jews call it Shavuot, but that's not the truth because that doesn't fulfill the whole count. And we're going to cover that.
And by the way, this goes back to the destruction of the temple, which happened, from the 17th of Tammuz all the way to the 9th of Av, which would include the 1st of Av, which is Shavuot. The temple was under siege and the temple was being destroyed in that time. And so the Jews moved that day by 50 days back to the 50-day count, the barley harvest, and that is where they celebrate Shavuot, because in those days they're mourning for 3 weeks, and then there's the 9 days, and then after that, that's when they can be happy. You can read in the Talmud, folks, that in that period they designate a time of the diminishing of happiness. And by the way, Shavuot, we're supposed to be joyful because it's the first fruits of the harvest, right? I've gone over this over and over again. So they clearly moved it.
And Lewis covers this. They ended up there because of something that happened with the temple. And I've explained this in my own timeline in another video, how we get up Tish B'Av, and then we get, first of all, 3 weeks of mourning, Tish B'Av, and then Tu B'Av after that. Which is all rabbinic, has nothing to do with Bible, nothing. It's what came later. All right, so we don't need to use those to reconcile anything in this presentation that we're talking about. All right, so we're talking about wheat, wine, and oil. Are they 3 separate days, separated by 50 days, or are they the same day? Where we're going to use the biangulation to prove that it is in fact the same day, right? The same season. Incidentally, the beginning of this point where I'm going to show you is the beginning of the harvest. So we're talking about the first fruits of each one of those things, the first fruits of the grain, the first fruits of the grape, the first fruits of the olive. All right. They're all being processed at the same time. They don't have the same growth period, by the way, but they're all coming in at the same time and being processed at the same time. That needs to be said. It's nature's synchronicity in those three. I don't want to call it a holy trinity, but it is the 3 very special ones in that season that concludes with Sukkot time, right? Which is the end of all the threshing, all the processing of the harvest. Everything's done. We're celebrating what we brought in. And the next thing that we're doing was preparing the land, and we're planting for the next.
And by the way, Sukkot is the last feast that doesn't have a first fruit. So everything before that is first fruits. Even the Passover, and then going from there all the way to Shavuot, Pentecost, is all first fruit stuff. But then you get to trumpets, Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot. And in Sukkot time, that's when you see man enjoying the fruit of the labor, right? That's when you see man tabernacling and resting. By the way, what feast is it? 7. What? 7. So we're resting. When we're with Yeshua in the kingdom, it's going to be when? Tabernacling. And so when he drinks the fruit of the vine, when is it going to be? Is it going to be Pentecost? No. Even though you can have new wine from Pentecost or Shavuot all the way to Sukkot, because all that time, all through the summer, you could possibly have new wine because you're picking grapes all through the summer. Just like wheat is being harvested all through summer, olives have been harvesting all through summer. So all through summer, you can have the first fruits of all of that. As long as you give the first fruits to Yah at a certain day, everything after that is yours. But when you celebrate the fruit of your labor for the full year, that is Sukkot. That means your job is done. Now we're resting and we're celebrating. So Yeshua, when he says, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine new again until Sukkot, you can still have new wine at Sukkot time, folks. Because, you know, you could have potentially picked grapes like 2 weeks before Sukkot because there's still grapes on the vine, right? So all summer long, you can have new wine. Does that make sense?
Season, right? So now we're resting, we're tabernacling. That is the end of the harvest season, even though corn is still in there, because that's like an October thing. You know, you can see that with corn mazes with Halloween, right? Corn is a late season harvest. Even though you see that in maybe the English translation of Deuteronomy 16, when it's talking about when you put the sickle to the corn, that's not corn there. That word in Hebrew is grain, but that's irrelevant. Anyway, all right, so I want to show you some of the videos that I come across. We're going to start with this one first from Leslie Dayton on YouTube. I am subscribed to her, and she did a really good job, but I know where she's coming from. She's in dispensation. She's looking for the rapture and all that kind of stuff. But this was a really interesting way of looking at this from her perspective. She's coming to a conclusion. So I can see that Yah is stirring the hearts and the thoughts of many believers to come to this point.
And her perspective, by the way, is the actual name of the month. And then she thought there was something really interesting about that. And then she started looking at new wine, yada, yada, yada. She's on this rabbit trail where she's going to find the truth, folks. This is how it started for me. I was like, what? Right? So I love where she is. And I'm excited for her on just as well as all of those that I show you in here. I'm excited for their journey because they're going to become a point where there's a eureka moment. And it all has to do with the correct calendar. It has to be on an agricultural calendar of the Bible, which is a solar lunar calendar. Farmer's Almanac to this day is a solar lunar calendar planting cycle. That should tell you something.
All right, take a look. This is what she says.
Month is so cool. Okay. The name of this month is so cool. So the Hebrew word here for this month.
All right, so she's talking about Av, the month of Av. This is where most of the calculations is going to take you guys. And I apologize
And
about
this word
the buffering here, but she makes that point. Menachem Av.
When I say most calculations, I should have added the caveat. This is if you do the correct agricultural count, you're going to, whether it's 7 days after the wave sheaf or the day after the wave, whatever, if you do it correctly, you're going to be ending up in the same season. It's not going to be in May. It's going to be July time, August time, depending on the year.
Menachem means comforter or counselor, but literally the month is called the comforter or the father, right? So if we're looking at this as Acts 2, where the comforter is given and the Holy Spirit is poured out, when you pour out something, what's being poured out? The wine is being poured out.
Whether that is water, like rain, or it's wine being poured out, That's the imagery there, because at this same time in the upper room, you guys, which was the third hour of the day, the high priest was pouring out that sacrifice on the altar. And when Peter said it's too early for us to be on, drunk, on new wine, he was literally talking about, because we can't drink new wine until after the priest pours it out. Then we can drink new wine. Do you understand what's happening there? That's going to be apparent later. The more you study that and look at it, what the third hour means. All right. We're also going to see something called the third day, and we're going to clear that up too.
But it's also the Holy Spirit is being poured out like wine, right? In this time. So this is very beautiful interpretation of what we're talking about here. She's almost there, you guys.
Comes from Babylonian exile, but this word was what this month was called when Jesus was here. It was called Av. And Av, just like Av means father, just like Abba means daddy. When I pray, I always start with Abba, because Jesus said I can call him my daddy. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call him Papa. In Hebrew, that's Abba. And so it's a special thing. So here, the Hebrew word Av means father. And it's also the name of the 5th month of the Jewish calendar. It's called Menachem, and I know I'm butchering it, Av. Menachem means comforter.
Menachem.
This month is called the Comforter of the Father. Guys, how perfect is that? Literally, the month is called Comforter of the Father. And so now, John 14:26, when Jesus promises the Holy Spirit, but the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, whom the Father will send in my name, he shall teach you all things, and shall bring all things to your remembrance, whatsoever I have said to you. And so the comfort of the Father literally came during the month of the Comforter of the Father. And so here, I thought this was neat. This was a Jewish study here. The month ahead is called Father Comfort Us. And so here, the darkest month holds the brightest promise. Even before the tears, healing has already begun. And so here we have this promise that we're already the first to experience the redemption.
All right. So right off the bat, you see what she's showing here. The Feast of Wine is 50 days after Shavuot. Moses returned to the sea to see the people drunk and playing the harlot with the golden calf.
All right. Now, that is true. I'm pausing here because I want to add this caveat with the point that she is making, right? That at the time, and this is not 50 days, my sister, it's 102 days. It is the time when he comes down with the 2 tablets. They were, playing the harlot with the golden calf. God wanted to destroy them. And even called them your people, Moses, for the first time. Up until that point, it was my people when he was referring to it to Moses. And then Moses, it's kind of a comical point in the whole story, because Moses says, wait a minute, this is your people, right? So that needs to be said. It is all the same time. It's not spread out by 50 days. It's all the same time. All right. So when they were worshiping the gold calf, that's when the law was coming down. Moses had to break the law by smashing it, and then had to go back up again. And by the way, that corresponds with trumpets on the other end. Okay. And what did they hear when he come back down? They heard trumpets, just like they heard when God spoke the first time. They heard trumpets, right? It's all got something to do with the first of the month. There's blowing of trumpets at that time. There's a lot to this. But the first time that Yah comes down and he gives them the 10 commandments verbally, this is the marriage covenant, right? That's not 50 days, by the way. That's like 63 days. Okay, so we need to understand that.
3,000 men died on that day. Well, that would be true if you believe that the Feast of Wheat Harvest, or Shavuot, or what is synonymously called Pentecost, because this is not 2 different days, at 50 days, then yeah, that would be correct. That would probably be correct. But that is not what's taking place, you guys. Shavuot, Pentecost, and the Feast of Wine is actually happening on the day when the golden calf. I've said that many times. And it was not the day that the marriage contract was. The marriage contract was before that, when Yah verbally made a contract with them, a covenant, and it was
63 days.
a covenant, not a, he wasn't giving them the law at that time when he come down with the 10 Commandments, you guys, and verbally told. That was the marriage covenant, right? We're going to look at the math here in just a moment, but right off the bat, we can see where she is. She's thinking that this is a different day.
We've already the first to experience the redemption when it comes to Passover, when it comes to Pentecost, receiving the Holy Spirit. We're receiving these promises first. The first will be last, and the last will be first. So the Feast of Wine is 50 days after Shavuot. Remember Shavuot, that's when they first came to the mountain. And that was the engagement.
All right, you're going to see here when they come and they actually get to Sinai, it is not 50 days, it's more like 63 days, you guys. So that blows the 50-day thing out of the water. It's not about just 50 days when it comes to the harvest, you guys. It's more than that. It's 7 Sabbaths complete and then 50 days, right? And we're talking about new moons are in there. So you're getting not just 100 days, not 99 days. No, you guys. Some years it is 103 days. Most years it's 102. And I'm going to show you that mathematically.
And then Moses went back and forth, and even the 70 leaders, the Sanhedrin, they went up and down. He went up and down the mountain 5 times before the 6th time that resulted in the golden calf. So here we've got the Feast of Wine, the golden calf happening 50 days after Shavuot. And we went through that last week. Moses returned to see the people drunk and playing the harlot with the golden calf.
All right, so let's examine that. Let's look at her logic here. She's thinking this is separated. All right. I clearly have shown you. You can go and look at the text. 30 days into the journey, they're at Elim. And then the next time you see that, they're, it's Sivan, and it's the same day. It's the 15th day. And then there's 3 days where they're going to wash themselves, and then Yah speaks to them. If you look at the math there, that is 63 days. Add 40 days to that. When you add 40 days to it, what do you get? Well, biblically, in the year that this happened, it was exactly 103 days. But like I told you, or I've said many times, most years it's going to be 102 days. But it can be 103 days because new moon days can be 1 or 2 days. I've said this over and over again. But biblically,
this is why you can't do just a straight count. You have to separate the months by the new moon.
When you do the math, it's 103 days.
3,000 men died that day because they.
Right? So that very day that the golden calf has happened, 3,000 died. And what did they say about the upper room? Right? When that happened, 3,000 were saved. So we see that balance. We're talking about the same day, right? But she's coming at this with the 50-day spread. And that's because, like I said, these guys are interpreting the Dead Sea Scrolls that way, which is you guys, they're still trying to understand. And mind you, those in ancient times would have understood that these would be the same day. Um, and then we're trying to figure it out later. So the next one was Dr. Barry Ah.
And what I meant by that is the terminology in there. So those that are, well, let's just say the YouTube eschatological archaeology experts interpret that as evidence that this is a new feast, when really it's actually a synonym for one day, right? They're missing they're missing the foundational parts of it, and that's happen quite frequently. A lot of times it's rabbinic things that are cited, like you see, messianic believers counting the Omer. You show me that in the Torah. It's nowhere in the Torah that tells you to do that. There's nowhere in the Torah that tells you to observe Tisha B'Av, or the 3 weeks of mourning, or Tu B'Av. Show me anywhere in the Bible that tells you to do that. You can't. Why? Because it's all in the Talmud. And the Talmud came about, the rabbinic tradition came about because the temple was destroyed. And this was what they came up with. This is very evident in the Talmud. They tell you explicitly the reason why they're doing this and coming up with their own way is because they no longer have a temple. And so they were trying to keep unity of a nation, which is Judah, because all of the tribes are nations, Gentiles, okay? Goyim, if you want to be technical, Judah is also a Goyim. It's a nation, right? Let's not get hung up on the semantics of technical terms. Even though some things are used today as a derogatory term, it is also a technical term.
And he's coming at this sort of a different way, because he acknowledges the moon has something to do with it, but he thinks the full moon that this is happening on, and it doesn't. When you do the counting, when you do this with the right calendar, it cannot be a full moon that this happened. But let's listen to his explanation here.
Exactly. And what I mean by that is that Passover time, at Sukkot time, you got full moons, but you got something that happens in the middle of that. And by the way, if you looked at it on a spectrum like a menorah, on the scale that most people do today, that center post would be off skew, a little bit to the left, more closer to Passover, right? Which seems odd. It seems like, wow, that's no symmetry in that, right? But when you put it in the correct place and you move it further to the right, another 50 plus days, then what happens? It balances out the whole freaking 7. So you got 7 in the menorah. It balances out the whole 7, right? Do you understand what I'm telling you? From this point to this point here, let's talk about that. You got 3 feasts on this end, 3 feasts on this end. Where's that center one should be? Should that be like in the center or more to this side, right? Because that's what happens when you keep Pentecost at the 50-day mark. It's more left of center. But when you put it in the correct place, it's right here. It balances out the whole thing. You see what happened there? It was moved by 50 days to a foreign point. Let's progress
a little bit before we get to, I think, which is the best, which is Lewis. But even with Lewis, he's got a little more adjusting to do on his final product there. Let's listen to Dr.
And I say that with the utmost love and respect to you, Lewis. Don't take that in the wrong way. I think if me and you could get together and can collaborate on a timeline, it would be amazing.
Barry talk about the very same thing, coming at this from a different point of view.
Against the traditions of man. But
I've said the same thing to you as well, guys, because it's hard to
signal his.
It is hard to accept things that has been, all right, Shavuot is at the full moon. That's one point I disagree there. It's not. It is the only feast that is at the new moon. There is absolutely new moon. We're coming into a new month, which is going to be the 5th month. And I'm going to prove that with scripture.
which is highly ironic, you guys, that it is the month that's been hidden. It's the feast that's been hidden from us. And it's at a dark moon when you can't see the moon. That's beyond ironic, folks.
Sure. Here's what he says.
And we're back with a very important message and a little bit of a controversial message.
It is.
You know, it's very difficult to go against the majority, to go against what has always been taught or always believed.
What I appreciate about this guy right here is he is not afraid to go against the grain and against what has been taught as tradition. Because when you look at this rationally, logically, mathematically, with calculation, and with a sound mind, I would imagine this is probably why there's so many atheists. When they did this themselves, they were like, well, the Christians don't believe this, and the evidence shows differently.
And a good example of that is 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb, folks, when it comes to the crucifixion. When you look at the actual text and the actual data there, it does not support that. You have to do some calendrical gymnastics to make it work. Okay, and we're going to address that at another video. But not only that, the length of the ministry of Yeshua has been conflated as well, and we're going to address that. So there's all these indiscrepancies, and look at all the studies that he's done. There's all these indiscrepancies and these counts and chronological timelines and things that have to be reconciled. And when you do it all together, when you look at all the information together, you start to see patterns and stuff. So that's one thing I like about this guy. And again, my ultimate conclusion on this is I don't agree with his end point on that, but that's okay, because I was where he is now, and I believe he will get to where I think a lot of us are eventually seeing when we understand the agriculture on this, because this is what has been preserved, folks. Agriculture and nature. It's a constant that can be used as a benchmark to measure from, okay? Especially when you go back to the specific grain in ancient times that's been grown for 7,000 years, which is emmer and durum. You can look at the growth cycles of that, and when it's planted in those areas for 7,000 years, it's always the same, never changing. I mean, we can measure from that. Mind you, we also have to negate and take out all of the GMO stuff and all of the things that have come since then, which is, something like 70,000 different varieties of grain. Think about that. 4 original, and now we have 70,000, right? Right? It's these kind of reasons is because people don't study the word and they don't honestly go and try to reconcile some of these mysteries and why things are seemingly not lining up, right? So I appreciate his effort. I don't agree with his conclusion, but I appreciate his effort.
To go against the traditions of man. But over and over again, God shows us that his people,
First of all, did you see his Bible? You see all those markings in there? Brother, you are my brother because of the depth you are willing to go to search out a matter, okay? So I've got utmost respect for my brother here.
Kodesh, that's the word holy, and it means holy and set apart. That his holy and set apart.
Look how tattered that Bible is. That is when you listen, don't debate a guy that's coming at you with a Bible like this. You hear me? When you coming at a guy that's got a Bible like this, you in trouble.
Part people go against the majority. Go against the grain. Go against the current. And many times are explaining something that's not well received and not popular. So we're going to tackle how to get to the true Shabbaot. And it's not the popular view, but it is the biblically sound, scripturally proven way. I hope you will open your...
All right, and there's also another witness you could bring, which is the agriculture, and I think he does that. You can see that he's got different timelines in his presentation. So this brother is very thorough. You can see he's got Shavuot and Pentecost in two different places.
However, I do not see any reference to the actual growth algorithm of the specific things grown and harvest in the feast. And that is crucial to understanding the feast. All right. This is crucial.
And I was at this point at one time, you guys, before I understood the synonym of this day. This day is Pentecost. Pentecost, first of all, means to count 50. And it doesn't necessarily mean 150. It could mean a set of 50. So I get what they're saying with it. This is multiple 50s. But in this sense, Shavuot is not just a count of 50. It's 250s plus a couple of days that are called new moon days, right? Which is, if you study the Bible talks about 3 days: a work day, a new moon day, and a Moedim or Sabbath day, right? Something where it is, anyways, 3 different days, right? So we got to understand that when we do this calculation. By the way, and this is also on a solar lunar calendar, that you need to recognize this. Otherwise, you blow through those new moon days and you come up with a different number. And this is why I have a disagreement with Lewis, as you'll see in a moment.
Ears and open your heart to let yourself, if you believe incorrectly, to be turned if the evidence is sound, which I believe it is. Because it's hard for us also to sacrifice that sacred calf that we've always held on to, and to change our mind, and worst of all, to admit we were wrong about something. But again, the Word of God is very clear, but as with everything in the Word of God, it's spread out throughout His message. So God says, who will I teach the new understanding? Who will I teach the advanced stuff, the secret, the wisdom? Those that are weaned from the milk, in other words, those that just know a little of this, and they will go line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. And then he repeats it, line upon line. And that means more than just searching all the times Sabbath appears in the Bible, or the seventh day. You know, you can do that now with eSword and Blue Letter Bible. You can just type in and search. But are you looking for the precept that he puts behind it? Are you looking for the line to match with the line? God promised in Daniel, at the end generation, many would run to and fro, and knowledge would be increased. But in the Hebrew, it's deeper. Many would run to and fro through his scroll, from book to book, back and forth. It's not just about having airplanes and motorcycles and taking trips across the world. It's running to and fro. What does God care about?
I would agree with that as well. It's not limited to travel, but also because of the internet and because we have access. Guys, we have access to databases that, oh my gosh, that ancient men would salivate over. The jealousy, right? Think about Isaac Newton, who was very into Bible codes and was very much limited to his mental capacity to learn Greek and Hebrew, to search by hand codes. He didn't have a computer. He didn't have databases and eSword and all those kinds of things to cross-reference and things like we do today. So me being an idiot compared to the man, I have an advantage to do these things. This is what he's talking about. To roll through and fro, through the scrolls. And the knowledge of the purpose of Yah is revealed by his prophets, right? A lot has been revealed by his prophets. And I'm not talking about prophets on the YouTube. I'm talking about biblical prophets, that we can search his scriptures and look at codes in his prophets and what is revealed there.
To and fro through his word, and knowledge of his purpose and plan shall be increased. Not just we have computers and we're doubling in knowledge, every 30 seconds, but knowledge of his purpose. That's what he really cares about. It's the most important truth, is his truth. So when we try to find something that is unclear in the Bible, we have to do line upon line, precept upon precept. So I'm going to read this post that I posted on my.
So, in other words, you guys, I appreciate you guys. His presentation is rather long, and we're not going to look at the whole thing there. All right, but I appreciate that brother's endeavor. He is going to get to what I believe is the truth. And as I said, I'm not in agreement with his conclusion, but I am in agreement with his endeavor there. Here's another brother. This guy is Nick Vanderland, and I believe that Lewis may have gleaned some things from Nick here on this, and Nick is one of those guys that's going to see these feasts as 50 days apart, as you'll see here in just a minute. So he is on the right trail, you guys, and he's coming from the other direction with the fruit of the vine, the timing of the new wine, right? And by the what does that mean? What does a new wine mean? Let's just establish that real quick, you guys.
As I just told you just a few minutes ago, folks, this process that I'm about to explain to you here, you can have new wine from the 1st of Av all the way to the end of summer. Okay?
First of all, we're talking about the Feast of Wine, or new wine. And as you're going to see here, it is mentioned in the Qumran scroll fragment Q11, a document found among the Dead Sea Scrolls that describes an idealized temple and its regulation. It seems to evade notice of the composers of the Tanakh. Hence, it was unknown to the 90s Qumran discoveries, right? They also discovered a feast of new oil, right? And I think the misunderstanding of what these people were saying, right? Because these things can be true in context when we're specifically talking about a feast of new wine or new oil or new grain. We can also know that there are times where there are some synonyms, that these three festivals are not separated, but actually one. And I'm going to show you that. I think you can see in Nehemiah that all these three things are happening at the same time. As I mentioned, the growth cycles are different. Like, grapevines and grape vineyards are going to go technically all year long, but they're going to produce grapes in particular.
In other words, you're not planting grapes every year. So the vineyards are going to be something that you plant and it's going to reproduce every year. Wheat, you got to plant every year. The olives, same thing as the grapes. It's going to come in yearly at the same time, right? Just like when you go outside in the spring and you see certain flowers all are blooming at the same time, there's a synchronicity there. It's the same thing with these. They're all coming in at the same time.
The grapes that are used in the first fruits of the vineyard, because wine is harvested all through the summer. But you can harvest some grapes early and get what's called an early vintage and a later vintage, because you could produce different kinds of grapes, right? You could produce something that was happening earlier in the season, just like here in Miami. You can grow mangoes that are earlier in the season, and then some are later in the season. And that way, the whole season, which could be 3 months, was producing mangoes. It's the same thing with wine and wheat. At the time, there was 3 kinds of wheat that you could plant, at least. maybe 4. And they would encompass the whole season, right? So in ancient times, you would plant smaller fields, but it would still take you all summer to harvest the grain. Now, farmers plant bigger fields and they have industrialized machinery and can do more volume, but it still takes them all summer long. You ever wonder why that is?
Well, let me tell you the reason why. And it's because of different strains of wheat. You're not harvesting the same strain all summer long. You're going to finish with that strain at some point, and then you're going to find that the later strains are going to be coming in later. And so literally you could plant those strains together, different fields, and harvest grain all season long, meaning all the 3 months, right? So you could do the same thing with your grapes, same thing with your olives, right? So literally all season long, you could harvest those 3 things.
That is because it is the season for these 3 things, folks. So whether you're doing it by hand or you're doing it by machinery, wheat grows in the same season. And you can do it, you can have a harvest of wheat all summer long, starting at the 1st of Av with the biblical wheat that I'm talking about. Okay, I'm not talking about the other wheats. There are 70,000 of them.
Specifically, we're talking about Emmer or Durham.
Of them today. But the biblical wheat, we're talking about a timeline that it was planted. We can see this in Exodus 9. We can also reconcile this with the wine. We're not even talking about the oil. And we can come to a fixed point. That is a point.
All right, so speaking of Exodus 9, I mentioned that. Let's go to that right. And here we are, folks. So just a couple of days, Exodus 9, a couple of days before the very first Passover, we could see something really interesting happen. And this is fascinating to me because I've studied this so long that eventually I ran into a USDA professor who specialized in grains, and I talked to him about this, and when I showed him this, his eyes lit up, and he agreed what I was saying. Right. So just to remind you, the hail fell. This is the 7th plague. The number 7 is very interesting to me. And it says the flax and the barley were smitten. For the barley was in head and the flax was in bud, but the wheat and the spelt were not smitten, for they were late crops. And I'm looking at this in the ISR, you guys. In the King James, it'll say, for they had not come up yet. And let me show you what they had not come up yet looks like. All right. So if we take a look at this graph right here, this is something on the cereals, in particular the barley. So at the time that is talking about in Exodus 9, when the wheat has not come up yet, meaning it has not come into ear, right? It's not an ear yet. It just looks like grass. So if hail fail and the wheat looks like grass and the barley is in ear, when the wheat is pelted, or excuse me, when the grains are pelted by a hailstorm, the barley's going to be smitten, but the wheat is not going to be affected. You know why? Because it's just looking like grass. In fact, when the hail melts, it's actually going to be beneficial to the wheat because it's going to add water to the ground. Imagine that in Egypt, right? So in Exodus 9, the wheat is no more than 15 days planted. Can you see that? It's within 10 or 15 days planted when it's not grown up yet. What is not grown up yet? That doesn't mean it hasn't come from the ground yet. It means it's not grown up into a head. but the barley was smitten. So that means it was in head. It was already producing grains. It was probably an in advanced state, probably ripening, because you can see in Exodus there that with Passover, just a couple of days later, we're doing wave sheaf. So what does that mean? That means we're waving something that's ripening. It's turning yellow, right? It's going to go golden soon, right? So we're waving something that looks like this, but the wheat looks like that right there when it's smitten. Everybody understand? 10 to 15 days, this is what the wheat looks like. The barley, which is advanced, is around this stage right here. Notice how many days that is. That's what, roughly, what? Almost 50 days, right? Which is going to ripen first? Which is going to be harvest first? So if we're doing wave sheaf here, what are we doing here when it's golden? Huh? And we could possibly be doing wave sheaf back here, because we're talking about a grain that was fed to animals. So this is not a primary source of your grain protein. This is fed to poor people. The wheat was what you wanted. This was fed to animals primarily, but you could get bread from it, right? So which is going to be cut first? Where are we putting the sickle to first? The wheat or barley? Because in the first fruits of the barley, you don't see the harvest. You see the first fruits. That's when it's ripening. It's probably more in the middle of that right there, where it's ripening. It's first turning yellow from green. It's starting to ripen. That's called a beeb time, right? So you're waving the sheaf here, and then later you're cutting golden grain. Does that make sense? Everybody follow. That is the logic of what I've been trying to show you there. Hold on. Let me get back to hang tight, folks. Here we go. Of this. The other thing I want to point out is, in ancient times, did you know that, aging wine was not a thing until the 17th century? It was not. The practice of bottling wine began in the 17th century. So we're talking in the 1600s, with widespread use of thick glass bottles and cork stoppers, which allowed wine to age properly. Before this, wine was typically consumed quickly after the production, as it was
Within 1
stored
year.
in porous containers that did not preserve it well. So in ancient times,
Within
they
1
didn't know
year.
this in ancient times, folks, that you could age wine. All right. So the reference to new wine is telling you something, that in the early process of fermentation, that was the best wine. Think of it as a bubbly sangria, a very sweet, bubbly wine. But the longer that it aged in porous containers like terracotta, think of a big 3-foot terracotta pot with a lid on top, and you put, these are called vats that you would put your wine in, that would only be good for a certain amount of time. Eventually, you could end up with basically a balsamic vinegar, right? Something that was mixed with olive oil. You can have a vinaigrette, but it would become vinegar before the end of the year. In some cases, if it was stored properly. They didn't understand bottling in ancient times. As I said, it was into the 1600s when they could do this. What does that mean? That means that when you grew grapes, just like when you grew wheat and other things, it was usually good for 1 year. You understand what we're talking about here? It's good for 1 year.
Now, the new wine, which is consumed in the first weeks of it,
Let me just say that this point here, the longer you kept these grains like wheat, it could turn into something called ergot. And I'm gonna just drop that right there. They probably found out that the hard way. Yeah, these things were typically consumed rather quickly. It is only in the story of Joseph where you see a storehouse, and these are under controlled conditions in the desert where everything is dry and you're not getting a lot of moisture where you could get away with this. So that all the conditions were right for that. But in ancient times, depending on where you are, you would typically consume these things within a year. It was much, much later when people started to discover preserving methods. All right. So, and again, water, just drinking water in this time was hazardous to your health, right? So think about that. This is ancient times.
is the best wine. This is what's going to be given to God, the new wine, right? Even though you see it in some of the scriptures I'm going to show you, where actually old wine is being poured out, but the new wine comes at a certain time, and we're going to try and biangulate that in just a moment, folks. So let's go to this next video. I want to show you Nick and what he says.
All right, before we go there, let's go to this actual scriptures that I was just referencing there. And this is what I mean. Leviticus 23, when we get into the feast, and I'm looking at the ISR again, and we see that we come through the first fruits of your harvest, right? So the festival of unleavened bread, and we see. So let's look at that. In the first month, on the 14th day, is the Passover, and then on the 15th day, which is of every month on the Hebrew solar lunar calendar, that is a Shabbat. But it happens to be a high Shabbat because it is also on this day the festival unleavened bread. That's why it's called a high Shabbat. Then, so in the whole Passover process, you're going to be celebrating more than 7 days because you got something at the end, on the end of that. That's the 8th day. All right. And then it says, on the first day that you have a set apart gathering to do no servile work, and you shall bring an offering made by fire, right? Remember, you're gonna see in this presentation a fire offering mentioned. Well, it's actually mentioned through.
I meant to say wood offering. Wood offering or fire offering is the same thing. It's another one of those synonymous things, you guys.
Throughout all of the feast, you're going to be doing an offering made by fire. That means you're going to have a bonfire for 7 days. And on the 7th day is a set apart gathering. You shall do no servile work. That's the Sabbath. All right. And then he goes on. And then it comes to the wave sheaf. We're talking about the wave sheaf. Now, this is the day after the Sabbath. This is not after 7 days. Because it says here, on the morrow after the Sabbath, right? Well, where was the Sabbath? After the 7 days? No. No. Did Yeshua rise on the 7th day? No, he rose on the 3rd day. When is that? It's tomorrow after the Sabbath. Right? Tomorrow after, in that context, we're talking about crucifixion week. And again, this is where it goes back to 3 days and 3 nights. It's not how most people have been taught. On the morrow after the Sabbath, which is the 16th. The Sabbath is the 15th. So after.
And specifically, this is when Mary, on the day after the Sabbath, right, she goes back to the tomb to find it empty. That's on the 16th day. It's 1, 2, 3. That's what I was trying to say there. Just it didn't come out right.
The 15th, on the 16th, the priest waves it. And on that day when you wave the sheaf off, you shall prepare a male lamb.
And by the way, I should have pointed this out as well. at when Yeshua came out of the grave on first fruits is when the priest is going to be waving the sheaf. So he literally fulfilled these feasts to the moment, right? Meaning, like when he was on the cross, they were also in the temple doing the sacrifice, right? And then so it's bam, bam, bam. It's not bam, bam, 7 days later, bam. That's not what's happening, guys.
You see the lamb there? A perfect one. As burnt offering to Yah. It is and it's grain offering. 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil. Now, the timing of this particular feast, folks, indicates that the grain offering right here and the ephahs of fine flour, because that comes from wheat, it is not the new, it is not the feast of flour yet, or feast of week yet, week, which is.
So what I was trying to say there is we're talking about weeks. So this fine flour is not from the current year. This is not a first fruits of the wheat harvest. This is from the previous year.
Connected to the wheat. This is the previous year. So all this offering here, this is not the first fruits of this harvest that we're in now. It's the end of the last. So we're pouring out all the things from the previous year, even the hin of wine. The wine that is poured out here is before the possibility of new wine.
And so think about that. That wine that's being poured out there is probably very vinegary. And this is exactly what was offered to Yeshua on the cross, by the way. He was offered vinegar. So think about that. All wine that was from the previous harvest is turned into vinegar at that point.
In this new season, when we get to Pentecost or Shavuot, as you will see, folks. So we're ending the year with the same things that we're about to give first fruits to in the next feast, right? And it says, unto the morrow after 7th Sabbath, you shall number 50 days, or you shall count 50 days. That's 103 days with the new moons. And you shall bring a new grain offering. What does that mean? What we just gave at the end of this one? I know we just gave first fruits of the barley. That's one thing, but which is this. But everything else, the lamb and its grain offering, which was, it could possibly be the sheaf.
But look how old that male lamb is. It's a year old, right? So this is a year measurement. The grain is also a year. The flour is also a year, and the oil is from the previous year. Okay, but also the wine is. It's only when you read down later, that's when you start seeing new stuff, the new wine, right? The new grain.
But it says 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil. Are we making that from the barley? I don't know. I think it's the remnants of the last cycle that's being used here. I could be wrong. An offering made by fire, so there's a wood offering, a sweet fragrance, and in its drink offering, which is the wine. It says there 1/4 of a hin, so that's 1/4 of a gallon. A hin is about a gallon of wine, right? Now, and then you go on through the count, and then we get to 50 days, 7 Sabbaths complete, and then 50 days later, now you shall bring a new grain offering. Does everybody see that? I don't want you to be confused, because you will see the same pattern through all of these feasts, folks, where you bring the same things. It just kind of gets conflated here, because this fine flour here is basically the remnants of what you had from the previous year. And when you get to a new grain offering, bring from your dwellings for a wave offering 2 loaves. So what are we doing here now? We're not waving sheaves of wheat. we are waving 2 loaves of bread of 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour they are, baked with leaven, first fruits to Yah.
So this is when you see the fruits of the current year is the first fruit. So that's going to be the wheat bread, the flour of it, and so forth, right?
So the 2 loaves represent the 2 tablets that Moses came down with. The bread of life, the law of God, is the 2 loaves of bread. That's Shavuot. Then let's continue to watch. And besides the bread, you shall bring 7 lambs. Wow. We see that number 7 there.
Look at the number 7 again. We keep seeing this pattern of 7. It's marking something. This is marking a 7 pattern.
Of a year old, perfect ones. So they're from the previous year. And 1 young bullock and 2 rams, which means we're talking about a bull that's about a year old, 2 rams that are about a year old, and they are a burnt offering unto Yah with their grain offerings and their drink offerings. That's the new wine, an offering made by fire, even though it doesn't
Made by fire is going to be your wood offering, right?
say new wine. This is the season for it. And Yah doesn't have to tell us that, because we got all of these synonymic words like the feast of new oil, the feast of new wine,
what the word, when you see something that is a wood offering or something that's burned by fire, you automatically know that it's something that's given to God, right? But there is, when it comes to all the animals that are being sacrificed and they're being burned by fire, guess who consumes that? That's the people. That's the Levites and the people, right? So it's not just burned up and thrown away. It's a barbecue, an offering made by fire for a sweet. You ever smelled what a tri-tip or a brisket smells like when it's smoking on a grill? It's a sweet fragrance, folks. This is a time where we're joyful and we're celebrating. We're eating the fruit of the land, the fruit of the vine, the fruit of the stock. It's all happening at this time. It's a celebration. And by the way, they didn't eat meat all year long, you guys. It was only at feast time when they were eating meat. Most of the year, it was a vegetarian diet.
feast of new grain. We all know when it is, so he doesn't have to tell us here. It's when their grain offering, their drink offerings, and offerings made by fire for a sweet fragrance, right? It's also, it's the besides the bread of first fruits as a wave offering, and besides the 2 lambs, they are set apart for the priests. So the priests get to have that. And the same day you shall proclaim a set apart gathering for yourself. You shall do no servile work. And by the way,
and this is when it goes to the people. So you got first fruits going to Yah, and the Levites eat that. But then you got everything else, all the other, like, because listen, there's 7 lambs that are sacrificed, and there's bullocks and rams and stuff. That's a lot of meat, folks. Where's it going? It's going to the people. They're having a feast. All right.
this is every month at this time, you're blowing trumpets. You see that in the 7th month with trumpets. But beginning of every month is a feast unto Yah. So at the beginning of the 5th month, when you see Aaron proclaim a feast of Yah, it's because it was the beginning of the month, not necessarily he was marking what eventually would be called Shavuot. He was marking the month there as well. But this would be throughout your generations. When you reap the harvest of your land, and we're at the end of it. We're in the time of the gleaning, so you're leaving the 4 corners. We see that in Ruth. It is a biblical concept. Do no servile work, offering made by fire. So there's a fire offering. You see this over and over again. So you're going to see this later when I talk about Nick and his presentation on the fire offering. And you're going to see me talk about the fire offering is actually all through all of this. All through all, and you see a mention of a fire offering. Well, folks, the fire offering happens all through every single one of these.
What I meant to say is wood offering. I just now realized that fire offering and wood offering is the same thing. It's a synonym there. So even though it says here offering made by fire, when you see in the Qumran scrolls where it says wood offering was not just one day. It was something that happened many times, right? So you have to look at the concept of when it's being mentioned as a wood offering, right? Because this is happening all throughout all the feast.
Feast. Okay? So let's go back to the video and conclude here.
And how he separates these out. But this is based on what's being discovered at Qumran, and they're seeing synonyms used for a certain day. I wonder what would happen if the same thing happened with the Feast of Trumpets. If they used the day of the bridegroom or the day of shouting. No, that's actually known. That's actually known. Day of the bridegroom or some ambiguous name where they think, oh my gosh, this must be another feast. And what would happen if that was the case? But we see it on the other end with Pentecost or Shavuot, but in reference to wine and oil and things like that. And we think, oh, these are separated by 50 days. That's not the case, folks. Let's listen to Nick's explanation. I love it, brother. I appreciate his journey. Nick, I just disagree with you, brother.
Shalom and greetings, everybody. It's Brother Nicholas James Vanderlane here. Victory for the people of Israel from by the narrow path, which are the 10 commandments. Today is the 29th day of the 4th month on Elohim, Zadok priest, Dead Sea Scroll, Enoch solar calendar. It's July 18th, 2019, and this video is being broadcasted from the Famagusta region of Cyprus. This video is titled The Festival of New Wine Rapture, the Wedding Festival, and July 20th through 22nd, 2019. And we're going to get into a reason why, a 3-day period for this event. A couple of scriptures I want to start off with real quick. I have
one thing that's really ironic to me, guys, is about this wedding festival and the rapture, because a lot of dispensationalists are looking for the rapture when it comes to the new wine. That is also this is a same day kind of situation. The wedding day, the day of the catching away, and by the way, it's not that I don't believe in the rapture. I don't believe in the pre-trib rapture, you guys. My position changed years ago. I believe in a catching away at this second coming, and that happens at trumpets. And then what happens right after that, folks? We're going to be spending Sukkot time. We're going to be dwelling with the Messiah at that time, right? So there are points of this where I can empathize to what I know where he's coming from. I just disagree.
Actually, on the first slide here, in Luke 22, verse 18, Yeshua said, I say to you that I shall not.
And by the way, this is where he's right, because the first fruits of the vine is going to be at Shavuot time, when we're pouring out that to Yah. But when you see that man is celebrating the fruit of the vine, what season is that? What comes after that? All right, so we're going to have trumpets, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot. Sukkot is when we're drinking the fruit of the vine, because now we're at the end of the harvest and we're celebrating that by eating bread. We're eating everything. We're eating dates and pomegranates, and the honey is flowing.
And as I said, you could still have new wine at this point, at Sukkot time, right? When Yeshua is drinking new from the fruit of the vine. This is in the kingdom in Sukkot time.
Everything is beautiful, is joyous. We're drinking wine. All that's happening in Sukkot time, right? That's when Yeshua is going to be doing this, when he will not drink until the fruit of the vine until Sukkot time. That's not Pentecost. That's not the first fruits of the grain, the vine. Okay.
Not drink from the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of Eloah shall come. And also in Matthew 26:29, Master Yahusha said, "But I say to you that I shall not drink again from this fruit of the vine until the day."
But think about that, folks. When is the kingdom of Eloah coming? Right? Again, trumpets, Yom Teruah, and then we got what? Yom Kippur, and then what? The seventh is Sukkotan, right? That's the kingdom. That's when we're dwelling in the kingdom. So when we dwell with Yeshua after the judgment, he is indeed drinking new wine from the fruit of this vine in the kingdom with us. You understand?
Day in which I shall drink it with you new in the kingdom of my Father.
Hallelujah. So when is that? When is that? So if trumpets is in line with the rapture or the catching away, then we got judgment that happens at Yom Kippur. And then what are we doing after that? We're tabernacling with him, when traditionally from the scripture, that's when everybody's drinking the fruit of the vine. We're not drinking the fruit of the vine at first fruits. We can, but we're not celebrating as a harvest until this time, the end of it. The beginning of it is Yah's. We can partake of that, but after it is poured out in the ceremony, okay? So that needs to be understood. This goes back to the Feast of Cana, you guys. I'm going to prove this with scripture.
And I just want to say when that is, that's the third hour of the day is when it's poured out. So this goes back to the upper room when Peter says it's too early, right?
The Feast of Cana happened earlier in a timeline that you might imagine. It happened closer to Passover, right? Not Pentecost. The wedding feast of Cana happened right before Passover, and that is one of the reasons why it was a miracle. Not the fact that Yeshua turned water to wine, because the leader of the feast didn't. Not just because of the water to wine is a miracle, but it's further than that. Even see that. All he saw was somebody brought him new wine, and he thought, wait a minute, why don't you give us the bad wine first? He wasn't even aware of the miracle that Yeshua did. The miracle to him was, we got new wine at the end of the season? What? That was the miracle to the host. Folks, you need to understand that. Now, this fruit of the vine, when he says this is when we're tabernacling with him. This is when the Father's already got his portion, and we're now celebrating this, right? And by the way, the wine is still pretty good at this point. It's not turning into vinegar or spoiling until really late. And by the Feast of Cana, you might have had wine that kind of was tasting a little vinegary. All right, it was getting bad, so it was not the best, right? So that's why this was a miracle.
So we did this one last year while I'm watching. I'm watching for this day, but I'm preaching righteousness to everybody out there. I'm trying.
Let me just add the caveat. It's not that turning wine to water is not a miracle, but to the host of the feast, he didn't see that. He saw the new wine coming out. That was what was amazing to him. So I just want to point that out.
To preach the 10 Commandments to turn you people who say they have faith in Yeshua to come and keep the 10 Commandments out of love, because Yeshua taught.
And this is one of the reasons why. Look at the beard. I mean, he's a man after my own heart. V-neck shirt. He just, he's not concerned about how he looks. He is concerned about truth, folks. So, and by the way, I'm the same kind of guy. I haven't shaved in months. He
said, he who is forgiven much loves much. And he said, if you love me, this is what he said, if you love him, keep my commandments. Which commandments? The 10 Commandments, plus the new commandment to love the brethren. This is righteousness. But people love lawlessness.
You're
With
right.
that being said, I've been watching this for days, ever since the September 24th sign happened, and it's always been a process of elimination. I'm not setting a date. We're watching the star here for the rapture. I want to disclaim something else, that this rapture event appears to be somewhat ambiguous. It could be a shield. So let's go ahead and start off with the festivals of Yahweh. This is...
All right. Now I want to point this out. This is how he sees the layout of the festivals of Yah, and this is a conglomerate of Dead Sea Scrolls mentions of synonymous feast, which is the feast of wheat, wine, and oil. These are all synonymous. It's happening at the same time, not in 50-day segments, but he separates them as such, right? Even the wood offering. The wood offering is actually happening, that Passover time. We could see that we're burning a fire. Also, at Sukkot time, we're also burning a fire. There's a fire burning in a lot of this thing. So it's not just a wood offering. So you can technically say this wood offering is also part of this. But especially at Sukkot time, are we burning a fire? All right, this is the end of he's got tabernacles as first fruits. That's not true. This is the end. This is the end of, this is after everything's been on the threshing floor and the presses. So it's the end. It's not the first fruits, right? First fruits is going to be here, and, well, 50 days is not. These are going to be the two first fruits, barley and wheat. But wheat is synonymous with wine and oil as well. Do you follow? So the early harvest is going to be barley, and then the latter harvest is going to be wheat, wine, oil. You're going to have dates in there, and I think dates is part of the early. We would have to look at that again. I think dates and pomegranates are going to fit in this in some way, but everything is completed by the time we get to tabernacles. So this is not first fruits, right? We're resting at this point. There's no more harvesting to do. It's all done. The next thing we're going to do is plow the land and plant seed, right? So the season is over at this point, not first fruits.
In chronological order, starting at the beginning of the year, working our way to the end of the year, we have Passover, unleavened bread, the wave sheaf barley, which is a first fruits festival. Then we count from this day 7 weeks and then number the 50th day, and then we have the...
Wheat is not available in that count, folks. I proved this 7 ways from Sunday. That count has to be 7 Sabbaths complete and then 50 days, which is going to push it to 102, 103 days.
Let me show you what the wheat looks like, guys, at this point.
And then we also have
if I can get it to
wine and oil, all
stop share.
at the same time being.
All right, give me just a moment. So this is what the wheat looks like at that count right there when you come to it, because this is planted. Remember, the wheat has not come up yet. Exodus 9. So obviously the wheat has been planted somewhere around Abib 1 or Nisan 1. This is what it's going to look like at 50 days. It's nowhere near ready to go. That's been my premier argument this whole time. All right. That's what it looks like. And this is taken at the actual time that people are saying is Shavuot or Pentecost. And it's not so. Right. So what is golden? The only thing that is golden at this time is what was growing before the wheat, which is what? Barley. So barley is golden at 50 days. 50 days. And so that's where we're putting the sickle to the grain. And then how many days we're counting? We're counting 50 days or 7 weeks. And that's the beginning of the harvest for wheat. So when does that take us? The 1st of Av. The 1st of Av. I want to make sure you guys are able to see that. I don't know if
So this is what it looks like. Just get that image in your mind. It is green. It's got heads on it, but it's green. 50 days is, and we're talking about emmer wheat planted at the first of Av, first of Nisan, and at the 50-day point, this is what it looks like. You cannot get fine flour from that. That is the premise of Mari. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation here. Process. So there's wheat on the threshing floor. There's grapes that are being pressed into liquid wine. And by the way, new wine is already at 7 days. It only takes 7 days for wine, grapes that are crushed, to turn into new wine. 7 days is all it takes, right? But even before that, it's still called new wine. I mean, before the fermentation process completely starts to happen is 7 days. So even before that, you got sweet grape juice, very sweet, up into 7 days, and then it gets to be sweet, bubbly grape juice for a couple of weeks after that, right? So there's a period where you only can have new wine. And after that, you got aged wine in porous containers. And again, I've told you that you can have technically new wine all summer long because you're harvesting grapes all summer. That is completely degrading over time. By the time the year runs out, it's not new wine. And by the way, when you put new wine into wineskins, old wineskins, what happens? It bursts. Why? Because there's gases being released. It's a fermentation process of new wine. It's a bubbly, it's like a sweet, bubbly sangria. Okay, that's what new wine is. That's the best wine biblically. So today it's aged wine, but biblically it was the very first part of the fermentation process.
The festival of weeks, or Shavuot, the festival of the wheat harvest, and that is a first fruits harvest. Then from this day, we are told in the temple scroll to count 7 Sabbaths and number the 50th day from this day. And it
All right. So 7 Sabbaths is happening. 7 Sabbaths complete, and then number 50 days from the time we're doing the wave sheet. All right. 7 Sabbaths complete. It is a marker. And you can see in Deuteronomy 16 that we are putting sickle to a grain at 50 days. But what is it? Well, let's look at that. If wave sheaf, if barley is ripening first, it's ripening in Abib or Nisan, then what is it doing 50 days later? Is it wheat that's ready to be harvested? Because we see that in Deuteronomy, Exodus 9, that the wheat is coming next, not the barley. The barley is in advanced state, not the wheat. So the wheat comes next. The barley is harvested first. So the first fruits of the barley is, look, it's still green the barley. This is a first fruit sheaved. When it's harvested 50 days later, it is completely golden at that point. But what is the state of the wheat at this point?
I just showed you.
We've got 50
I just showed you what
days
it looked
here,
like.
right? And then it's time for barley to be harvested. What does the wheat look like? Well, the wheat looks like green grain in ear. It is this color all the way through to the ear, all the way through. And so what did the rabbis do in the Talmud? They thought, well, we must be cutting this and laying it in the sun so it can dry out, which is not going to give you fine flour for fine bread. No. And other rabbis, the Sephardics, what were they doing? They were cutting barley because at this point it is completely golden. And it was the obvious thing that was being harvested and cut and made into the first fruits of Shavuot. So this is where you get the first argument between rabbis in the Talmud. And by the way, this is some 900 years later after the destruction of the temple, where they cannot make the distinction between this and this. right? So move this to here, to another 50 days, and then move this over back over here to this point, and now you got it right. The wave sheaf is just the ripening barley. 50 days later is the cutting of the barley. This is Deuteronomy 16, where we're putting the sickle to the grain, and then we're at, what are we doing there? What? We're counting, what? 7 weeks. What happens there? This is where the wheat, the wine, and the oil are being harvested and processed all in the same season. And by the way, it's also the same season we're using the wood offering, because we're burning what? We're burning a lamb. There's a lamb that's burned at this time. The first fruit of the spring, what was born in the spring, is being sacrificed here. The lamb that was born here in the spring, the lamb.
And I was technically wrong about that. It is a yearling. So it wasn't just born in the spring, it was born the previous spring. That's what's given at the first fruits. It's the previous lamb. So I need to correct that.
Is being given here as a first fruits offering at this feast. So not only did one die here at Passover, but one here as well.
Not just one, it's 7. It's 7 dies here, 1 dies here.
Does that make sense? Reading in the text, you can see it. There's a lamb that is given here. Right? So this is a recurring theme. The lamb is not only given at Passover, but also here. To Yah. Okay? So make no mistake about it. So here is the catching away. Here's the judgment. Here's the rest. And this is the end of the harvest season. We have nothing else to do. We are drinking wine and celebrating with Yah. Right?
Brings us to the festival of new wine. Here's the instructions out of the temple scroll. You shall count 7 weeks from the day when you bring the new grain offering to Yahweh, the bread of first fruits. 7 full Sabbaths shall elapse until you have.
All right, so look at that. So he's talking about Deuteronomy 16. You shall count 7 weeks from the day you bring the new grain offering, the bread of the first fruits, 7 full Sabbaths. Right? So that's another 50 days until you've counted 50 days to the morrow after the 7th Sabbath. Okay? That new wine and drink offering, that is the first fruits of the wheat harvest.
Counted 50 days to the morrow of the 7th Sabbath. You shall bring new wine for a drink offering, 4 bins from all the tribes of Israel, 1/3 of a hin for each tribe.
So that new grain offering after 7 weeks, that first grain offering is going to be barley. Then the first fruits after 7 full Sabbaths is going to come. After counting 50 full days to the morrow after the 7th Sabbath, which is going to bring you into new moon time, then you shall bring the new wine for a drink offering, 4 bins. And when does that happen? When does that happen? It happens on the first day, but we're talking about the third. It's like 9 o'clock in the morning. Exactly the same time that the upper room guys were being accused of being drunk on new wine. It's 9 o'clock in the morning.
And then
right.
there's
So
a
he's
lot.
right. He's right. He's on the right trail, you guys. Again, I don't agree. I don't agree with his conclusion because he is on the Zadok calendar. He doesn't even think that the moon's involved at all. And Lewis, I'm not sure about yet, because well, you'll see how he does his video here. He does use synthesis to
More instruction.
sorry. Give me a moment here. Now, like I said, this is probably the best or the closest I've seen coming from the other direction is Lewis. And here's Lewis, by the way. Go and subscribe, Postscripts, Prophecy Talk over there. I'm going to share his website, but also we're going to look at his chart in depth as we go through this. All right, so keep that in mind.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are strapping in for a very specific, and I have to say, deeply esoteric journey into theological chronology.
It's a deep one for sure.
It is. So if you're fascinated by the idea that accepted history and even prophecy might be off by over a month, you're in the right place.
And we're not talking about a simple miscalculation, are we? This theory suggests the whole foundational math has been wrong for centuries.
Exactly. We're looking at a system that challenges, the settled traditions of both the church and centuries of Jewish practice.
That's right. Our source material today is from Luis B. Vega, and our mission is to unpack his Feast of New Wine theory.
And his rapture calendar calibrations.
Right. This is highly specialized stuff, but what he's essentially proposing...
All right, as you see, Lewis has got a timeline, which I love. This is one of the things I love about Lewis, is he's very thorough in his research. And he's got a timeline here. Well, there's some things that are off. I'm going to point it out, and but it is a great starting point, and I appreciate that he is seeing a couple of different things, even though he's listed. What I believe he's listed here is what the rabbis has identified as Shavuot, and I've gone over this before in videos. But also, there's something else called a Pentecost. And if you examine those two things, you see that they're the same day. They got to be the same day. And we're celebrating wheat, wine, and oil on that same day, right?
Is a fundamental recalibration of key biblical feast dates. He's claiming the standard religious calendars have missed the true timing for Pentecost.
Okay, let's just jump right into that, because the stakes here feel pretty high. The core of this whole theory, it seems, is finding the correct non-negotiable date for something called the Feast of New Wine.
Yes.
And the author argues that this one date, once you fix it, perfectly links the Acts 2 event Pentecost with the end of the harvest cycle, and, maybe most surprisingly...
All right, so it's not the end of the harvest cycle, it's the beginning of the wheat and summer fruit harvest cycle, okay?
A specific...
By the way, barley does not begin this. Barley is another first fruits. So barley is a first fruits, and the wheat and summer fruits are also a first fruits. All right. So this would be concluded at Sukkot time. That's the proper chronology.
Astronomical alignment.
That's the trifecta he's aiming for. But to really get it, we have to start with the math. That's the most rigorous part of the theory.
The calculation.
A fundamental calculation that sets Vega's work apart is what he calls the 99-day count. And it comes from his reading of Leviticus 23.16.
Wait, hold on. 99 days. I mean, we usually hear about Pentecost being 50 days after the Omer count starts.
Right, the 50 days.
So how does he get to nearly double that?
All right. So right off the bat, you can see he's counting 99 days, right? And he's ended up here with the golden calf. Do you see a difference? So from what I've shown you, this is the day right here at the new moon at the beginning of Av, right? This is the place right here. So there's a discrepancy here. We're going to see how he got there.
Okay, so this is the crucial leap of interpretation. Traditionally, you start the Omer count, and 50 days later, you land on Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, what Christians call Pentecost.
The giving of the new grain.
Precisely. But Vega interprets the scripture as a consecutive time frame. He sees the initial 7 Sabbaths, so 49 days, plus a whole separate subsequent 50-day count that's mentioned right after.
Ah, okay. So in his view, the traditional Jewish celebration of Shavuot, that's only the first 50 days.
He's arguing it's just part 1. The calendar, according to him, demands an additional 50 days of waiting to reach the true Pentecost of the New Testament.
Which would be the second cycle.
The second 50-day cycle. This is what pushes the true Pentecost, which he equates to the Feast
All right, that theory is very correct, but we're going by lunar solar calendar, which gives you a different number, as I'm going to show you in a moment.
Of new wine so much later into the summer.
Okay, the length of the count is one thing, but as we always say, the start date is everything. The whole thing falls apart if you start on the wrong day.
Absolutely. The entire calculation is dependent on that initial date.
So what are the options? And why is this theory so committed to one specific choice?
Well, historically, there was this, big debate. There were basically 3 starting points. You could start the count on the day after a weekly Sabbath, or the Sabbath day after a complete week, which is what the Zadok calendar used.
Right, which is completely wrong. And I've mentioned this before on the 3 days and 3 night conundrum, showing that it could not be 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. That was just an idiom or a parallel that Yeshua was using, right? But that's irrelevant to this, right? So they're celebrating that a full week, right? So we're talking about the 14th, 15th, 16th, right? That area there, the 14th being Passover, the 15th on the lunar solar is a Sabbath. So what is the day after? The morrow after the Sabbath, the 16th, right? So that's the difference from where we start. However, I still have an issue with his count because he's not considering the new moons, which is a separate day, folks. And you come up with, if you do 7, do exactly what is commanded, 7 Sabbaths complete, and then count 50 days, you will have the correct amount of days in there because it includes the new moon cycle.
Or the day after the high day Sabbath.
And Vega lands on.
He's more convinced, as he puts it, of starting the count on Nisan 15. That's the day after Passover. For him, Passover is that high day Sabbath, and
it is a high Sabbath point, but the 15th is always a Sabbath every month. 8, 15, 22, 29 every month. Exodus 16 proves this.
Nisan 15 is the only fixed anchor that makes everything else line up.
That fixed Nisan 15 start date.
Yeah.
That's the key. It's like the anchor that locks the whole chronology in place, no matter what the lunar calendar is doing.
It makes it a solar calendar, essentially. And that's where the Qumran discoveries, the Dead Sea Scrolls, become so important.
Specifically the Temple Scrolls, Q11.
Yes. The Q11 scroll revealed this huge piece of lost theological history. There wasn't just one Feast of First Fruits. There were 3.
3.
All right. So this is where you see that Lewis has adopted the same thing that several others have tried to rationalize. New grain, new wine, new oil, separated by 50 days. Now, there's a couple of reasons why I believe this is seen this way. One is no understanding of the synonyms for these words in Hebrew. So in ancient times, if we say the Feast of New Wine or the Feast of New Oil, you knew it was going to be a certain day because they're synonymous. But if you don't understand it, you might break them down to 3, and you will also give them a 50-day because you don't understand the process. All 3 have a beginning of the processing when harvest begins and the processing begins, but also that process goes all through the summer. So you got 3 months where grain, wine, and oil is being processed, folks. And it only ends right there, right before trumpets. And then you got, so that's the catching away. And then you got the judgment. And then you got where we rest, right? And that's when we enjoy the new wine or the grain, the wine, and the oil. It's not new by that point. It's tolerable, in other words. It's not at its peak in its sense of the best, because the best is clearly the new wine. But it's tolerable. It hasn't turned bad. It's still good that you can drink it right out of the vat, right out of the porous vat, not out of bottles. Again, we're not aging wine. Wine is only good for the year, right? So keep that in mind. These 3 that he's talking about here, I propose is one day or one season, the beginning of that season, which is Av the first of Av. And we can prove that from scripture, because in the month of Nisan, you can see this in John where Yeshua's had an interaction with the woman at the well. This is right before Passover. The fields are the way they are in the Exodus, right? Very similar. The wheat has not come up yet. It's still looking like grass. The barley is getting close because we're real close to the wave sheaf, right? The ripening of it. But Yeshua says something really bizarre. He says the fields are ready for the harvest, right? He's making an idiom. He's making something very deep is what he's saying here, right? And then he says something, don't you say it's still 4 months until the harvest? He says, don't you say, he says it's here, don't you say it's still 1, 2, 3, 4 months until the harvest?
Grain, new wine, and new.
Right? That's when he says that. Is in Nisan. I'm going to show you that in just a moment where he says that. But again, think about that. In John, just after the miracle of Cana, where he turns water into wine, folks, and that is in the month of Nisan, the 3rd day of Nisan to be exact. Okay? He is turning water into wine in this month when it's running out, because this is when the wine harvest is, when you can have new wine. So it's not really the best wine at this time of the year. The best wine is going to be here and all the way up through Tishri. You know, you're going to have really good wine. But Nisan, this is when we've had wine from the previous year, okay? So at the wedding feast, it's wine from the previous or the year that we're still in, because this is the beginning of the year, and the harvest for the wine is actually here. So it's going to lap a little bit. So now we're coming to the end of the wine, and now we got to wait till the new wine, right? The best wine. This is one of the reasons why it's a miracle, because it was happening here and not here, right? Everybody follow?
Oil. This implies 3 separate 50-day counts, or, as Vega sees it, a structure of 3 consecutive cycles.
Wow, okay. That's revolutionary. It means the calendar was way more complex than a rabbinic tradition has passed down.
It really is.
So if we use his method, the 99-day cumulative count, starting firmly on Nisan 15, where do these other 2 feasts land?
And this is where the fixed date system shows its power, you could say, because the start is always Nisan 15. The second count, the Feast of New Wine, always falls on July 23.
Always July 23rd.
Which is Tammuz 23 on the Hebrew calendar. And then the third count, the Feast of New Oil, always falls on September 11. That consistency is the backbone of his whole.
All right, another thing is he's doing this on a Gregorian calendar and trying to lap it on Yah's calendar, and not acknowledging that these are dominated by the moon cycle, right? So they're not always going to be 29 and 30, right? He's just got them laid out that way, but even still, his count is coming up at a fixed point. That is the, in this point right here, and he's still shy of the actual because of the inaccuracy. We're going to show you in just a moment on Yah's calendar and how it's laid out that this is the point where you end up.
Prophetic claim.
Okay, so let's move from the math to the fallout, the theological challenges this creates. Because this theory doesn't just offer a new date, it actively says centuries of tradition are just wrong.
It really does.
Let's start with challenge number 1.
That is true. That is true. And I appreciate the fact that he is tackling that. It's just he's also gleaning from the Dead Sea Scrolls that these are separated out, and they're not. They're synonymous to a fixed point. And that point is going to be right here. Now the reason why that Aaron says tomorrow is a feast unto the Lord, right, is because every point right here, right here, right here,
Shmiter and Mount Sinai.
right here, every beginning of the month. Do you guys know this? And I can prove this from the scripture. Every beginning of the month is called a feast unto the Lord. This is separate from Shabbat. This is the feast of the new moon. David celebrated this, all right? So it's happening at the beginning of the month, every month. And it can be 1 day or 2 days. And we can see that with the story of David and Jonathan and Saul, that the feast of the new moon, where you blowing shofars. And by the way, it's not just the 7th month that you're doing that. It's literally every month. And the 7th month is trumpets, okay? But every month is a blowing of shofars, celebrating a feast unto the Lord called the new moon feast. So what Aaron was talking about and why it falls right here, even though he didn't know it was going to be eventually called Pentecost or Shavuot, he knew it was a feast of the Lord because it was new moon. Does everybody follow? That is a fact, okay? When you understand the complete clock. The clock is not just the big hand. And it's not just the little hand. It's both hands, the sun and the moon. And all the numbers around the clock is the stars.
Right. So Vega argues that the traditional Jewish celebration of Shavuot, which connects the feast to the giving of the law at Mount Sinai, is chronologically impossible.
How so?
He points out that most biblical scholars agree that 50 days after leaving Egypt, the Israelites were still walking.
I brought you the same point. I have told you that from when they cross over and when they get to Sinai, it is not 50 days. It's more like 63 days by that point. And by the way, Lewis, I noticed that you've got, all right, so when they cross over at Nueva and they get to this point and then they travel inland a little bit to a place called Elim, the Bible documents that it's been one complete month. All right, so the Exodus and the crossing all the way to Elim has to be 1 month. And I'm going to show you that, okay?
They were in the Sinai Peninsula wilderness en route. They hadn't actually gotten to the foot of Mount Sinai yet.
So his conclusion is they couldn't have been celebrating the giving of the law because the law hadn't been given yet. They weren't.
That's
there.
absolutely
Exactly.
correct.
It's a significant historical critique disguised as a calendar critique. He's saying Shavuot was a real harvest feast, but the connection to Sinai was artificially added later, a theological anchor that...
All right, so what he's talking about, I believe Shavuot is, or the 50-day count is a physical harvest there, but it's not wheat that's being harvested at 50 days, folks. And how do I know that? Because the wave sheaf of ripening barley is harvested 50 days later, right? It's the wheat that is 102 days later. All right, so here's where we're putting the sickle to the grain, what is traditionally called Shavuot by the Jews. It's right here. That is barley that's being harvested. How do I know that? Exodus 9. Exodus 9 shows us that the wheat that's been planted, it hasn't grown up yet, is approximately been planted the 1st of Nisan. And the barley that is being ripening just the days after the crucifixion has been planted about 63 days, and it's got about 50 days left. That is a agricultural fact, folks, verified by the USDA, okay, based on the agricultural benchmarks in Exodus 9, and that's why God gave them to us. An expert, a PhD in agronomics, in agriculture, can look at that text and tell you that the barley has been planted 63 days at least before the wheat was planted, based on the information in Exodus 9, the 7th plague. Based on that information, we know that at 50 days of that count, that's barley being harvested. That is what is being, the sickle is putting to the grain right here. And then in Deuteronomy 16, it says count another 7 weeks or 50 days. Where does that bring you? Right here to the new moon here. So Dr. All is wrong. It is not a full moon. It's a new moon. It's the only one in the whole of the feast, of all the feasts, it's the only one that has a new moon involved, and that's right here. All right. And by the way, the Jews do something what's called Tish B'Av, which starts at the 17th of Tammuz, which is 3 weeks of mourning, 21 days to the 9th of Av, which encompasses the whole time that the Romans were sacking the temple in 70 AD. They completely, there was no Shavuot celebrated. There was no new wine. There was no wave offering of the bread. At that point, it never happened. They didn't have the resources to do that, folks. That's historical fact. And the Jews, to this day, have designated that period, and we can see this in the Talmud, as a time of mourning. Shavuot is supposed to be a time of joy. So you cannot have joy and mourning in this same period, because they write in the Talmud a time of diminishing joy. Now, whether they consciously understood that the real Shavuot was here or not, they designated this period as a time of mourning. And then they have something called the Tu B'Av, where they are joyful again after this. But this point became a no-go for Yah's feast, and so therefore Shavuot is celebrated at the 50th day, which is the barley harvest. They do not recognize Pentecost and the correct count that is in the Talmud. That is fact. And this is why they count omers. You do not find that in the text. If you are counting omers, you are keeping a Talmudic tradition. If you're keeping Tisha B'Av, you're keeping a Talmudic tradition. If you're keeping Tu B'Av, you're keeping a Talmudic tradition. It is not in your Bible.
Doesn't fit the Exodus timeline.
Okay, that's a big one. What's the second major challenge?
The second one targets the timing of the new wine feast itself.
Yeah.
Even the groups who knew about the three feasts, like the Essenes at Qumran.
The ones who had the scrolls.
Right. They celebrated the Feast of New Wine on a day called Av 3, which is usually in August.
All right, so they're saying that it's the third day. That they believe that it's the third day of Av, right here, is when new wine is. I believe it's the third hour of the first day, and we see that in Acts 2. When Peter is accused of being drunk on new wine, he says it's too early. It's only the third hour of the day. And that's because the third hour of the day is when it was poured out. The third hour of the day on the first day, folks. On the first day, the third hour is when it's poured out. So it's too early to be drunk on new wine. Does that make sense? So I think the third day discrepancy is actually the third hour. It's not the third day, because Shavuot, if you do the correct count, 102 days. That's the new moon's involved. And I'm going to show you in a display here. It's Av, the first month of Av. So we're doing three things here. Three things are being processed. We can get wheat here, we can get wine here, and we can get oil here. And this is when it's celebrated, right here. All in one day. Not the third day. The third hour of the first day, folks. And I know it's going to upset some people, but I'm telling you, I think there's a discrepancy there. Even still, even if it is the third day, the first day is when the wheat is being waved. So we're still in that region. So you have to see there's a possibility. It's at least plausible. There's a discrepancy there. Maybe it's the third hour of the first day and not the third day. Does it make sense?
Vega completely rejects that August timing.
And why is August too late for him?
It goes right back to the harvest, to the agriculture. He argues that a feast of new wine must correspond to the end of the summer wheat harvest.
No, it corresponds with the beginning of the wheat harvest, not the end. The end of the wheat harvest and the end of the wine pressing and the end of the oil pressing is Shavuot. Okay?
And by the time you get to Av, to August, the harvest is long over.
So it doesn't make agricultural sense.
None at all.
The harvest may be over, but it's still processing. You're still processing all of that stuff. And so the threshing floor, the wine presses, all that's going on. Nehemiah talks about in those days, I saw Judah pressing, grapes and bringing in the sheaves and making all the summer fruits. They were doing all at one time. It's happening all at the same time, you guys, the same season in those 3 months. And it's going on all summer long. It's not spread out. It is spread out for barley and wheat, but after that, the wheat, the grapes, and the oil, all of that is coming in simultaneously. The very last thing is the corn. Corn can go into autumn, and this is why you have what? Corn mazes at Halloween time on the pagan calendar, right? It's because corn is last.
Celebration would be disconnected from the actual event it's supposed to be celebrating.
Which brings us right back to his fixed date of July 23rd, or Tammuz 23. It's the date the math gives him, but it also happens to line up perfectly with the end of the wheat harvest in that part.
All right, as I see that my internet dropping out there, you guys, I want to go, I'm going to wrap up here. I want to go to give me just a second, you guys. All right, just so you guys, I want to wrap up here. I want to go to Lewis's chart, and you can find this on its website, you guys. All right, so just to review, Exodus 9, what is described there and what is verified by a USDA PhD research scientist, expert in grains. When he looked at this, he agreed that what is described in Exodus 9, that wheat had to be planted somewhere around the 1st of Nisan. So by the time wave sheaf comes, that looks like grass. So 50 days later, in the month of ER, we're harvesting barley. 50 days after that, right? Or actually 100, it's totally 103 days from the wave sheaf, which means the growth cycle is in the range of 120 days, which is the exact growth cycle of wheat from this time. That fits in the range. And by the way, also barley is planted much more earlier than this. This is why it's harvested first. We can benchmark that and then find where the true Shavuot, which is right here at the dark moon. So Lewis, you're just off a few days, brother, on your calculations. I would love to get with you, like I said, and collaborate on a timeline, because there's a lot here. There's what happened after the destruction of the temple and what the Jews did to replace all of this. They completely bypassed the agricultural part of this count and started doing something on their own. And the first part was counting omers. So anytime you see somebody counting omers, they're 100% wrong. There's no counting omers. That's a rabbinic thing. That's from the Talmud. We are counting weeks, and we are doing this on a lunar solar agricultural calendar, which includes the new moons. You have to do that, or you will not come up with the right place. Again, it's at the time, the golden calf as at the beginning of Av, folks. And historically, on the rabbinic timeline, the very last Shavuot, or Pentecost, before the destruction of the temple, which was on the 9th, there was no more animals to be sacrificed. They could not perform. They had no wheat to produce bread and no animals to do the sacrifice on the very last Shavuot before the destruction of the temple. That needs to be shown on a timeline, because Yah had already ended the priesthood with Yeshua's crucifixion. He allowed 40 years of grace before he fulfilled what Yeshua said and destroyed the temple. That happened at the 1st of Av, falling on Shavuot. That is when the temple really fell. For 3 weeks, they're in the courtyard falling, killing people for 3 weeks, blood to the ankles of the people fighting there in the courtyard. No sacrifice. The temple is burned by the 9th. God was done with it. And that's where it ends, folks. And then we get rabbinic tradition from that, and then Christians trying to build on that, and they come up with the wrong day. That's because Yah hid the day. Not only is it hid by the moon, it's also hidden from us, on the surface. You have to really dig to find that day. So I hope you learned something here. I really do.